اضرب واحد في اتنين، واحدة تانية اسمها هدى طول حياتها فاكرة ان دخول الجنة ترضي جوزها، يوم بعد يوم تطبخ نضف كل كون، امل لقت جوزها اتجوز واحدة تانية حسابه فوق. بنت في سن بنتها ست مش مصدقة ازاي نظام يساعد راجل يأذي دنيا عندها، ازاي نظام يساعد راجل يأذي دنيا عندها. مش عايزة استنى ثانية واحدة كمان، شفت عنف في مكان امان، ما تقوليش كلمة تحملنا احنا كتير، ووقت تفكير جديد. ثانية لا استنى لسه بادية ما خلصتش، عندي حب ناسي بس برضو مش هطنش البلاوي اللي الست بتشوفها، الكلام ده برا البيت وحتى جوه بين العيلة او في الشغل والمدرسة. شفنا ظلم وبهدلة، فين حقوقنا؟ امتى دورنا؟ الوقت انتهى، طول حياتنا احنا مستنين اليوم ده. ايام بحس ان الدنيا ماشية عكسي، وبسأل نفسي الظلم جاي منين ولادتي، كرمني ربي زيك صاحية وفايقة وشايلة، بس مش هستنى المشاكل مش هتحل نفسها. أيام بحس إن الدنيا ماشية عكسي، وبسأل نفسي الظلم جاي منين ولادتي، كرمني ربي زيك صاحية وفايقة وشايلة، بس مش هستنى المشاكل مش هتحل نفسها. أيام بحس إن الدنيا ماشية عكسي، وبسأل نفسي الظلم جاي منين ولادتي، كرمني ربي زيك صاحية وفايقة وشايلة، بس مش هستنى المشاكل مش هتحل نفسها. كان في بنت اسمها سلطانة، حكاوي في العمارة، اتجوزت ابن عمها بقت حالتها صعبة، مفيش حب ولا مودة، حتى كل المجتمع وأمها الاتنين واقفين ضدها، مفيش رحمة ولا جدعنة، مفيش رحمة ولا جدعنة، مفيش رحمة ولا جدعنة. اضرب واحد في اتنين، واحدة تانية اسمها هدى طول حياتها فاكرة ان دخول الجنة ترضي جوزها، يوم بعد يوم تطبخ نضف كل كون، امل لقت جوزها اتجوز واحدة تانية حسابه فوق. بنت في سن بنتها ست مش مصدقة ازاي نظام يساعد راجل يأذي دنيا عندها، ازاي نظام يساعد راجل يأذي دنيا عندها. مش عايزة استنى ثانية واحدة كمان، شفت عنف في مكان امان، ما تقوليش كلمة تحملنا احنا كتير.
Hello, everyone. Am I in view?
Yes.
hear me? All right, great. Can you hear me now? All right, fantastic. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of Sisters in Islam and Community Muslim Universal, I wish you all good evening, and for some, a very good morning, and welcome to the third and final session of our International Public Forum series titled Islam, Freedom of Expression and Countering Extremism. My name is Rozana, and I'm the moderator for the session this evening. The first forum, which took place on 2nd December, was focused on the terror attacks in France. The discussion included some reflections of the responses coming from the Muslim world to the attacks, and what were the dominant narratives and discourse that took place, as well as reflections on the kinds of conversations that aren't heard but much needed within Muslim communities. The second forum, which took place last week, brought the conversation closer to home on what were the ripple effects, if any, of Charlie Hebdo and the attacks in France on our Nusantara. There was also a discussion looking at Islamic sources that support for a more moderate response to violence, and how freedom of speech that is needed and promoted is in the form of good speech. Additionally, there was also a discussion for those doing work on the ground to address extremism, to reach out and engage with diverse groups, but with the purpose to seek understanding instead of immediate solutions, because the latter may not be immediately achieved and in fact may backfire. In this third and final forum titled Extremism in Our Backyard, we are bringing the context even closer to our experiences to look at the kinds of extremism that are happening in Malaysia and Indonesia. So right now, there should be a slide coming on to your screen because the organizers would like to inform you that we are now airing live on Sisters in Islam's and Community Muslim Universal's Facebook pages. So you can see and share the details that are available on your screen. Okay. So we are on those links for KMU and for Sisters in Islam. Fantastic. So we have with us tonight three very learned and respected panelists, and I will introduce them in the order of their presentation for this session. So firstly, we have Dr. Ananthi Ramiah, who is a social psychologist and director of Data Luminescence Research in Kuala Lumpur, which is a research house providing data-driven clarity and nuance to complex social challenges. She was a principal investigator and lead author for the study sponsored by CIMB Foundation in 2017 on ethno-religious integration, overcoming challenges and maximizing the promise of multicultural Malaysia. And the study undertaken by Merdeka Center in 2018, Religious Extremism in Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, on the prevalence, narratives, and contributory factors. In general, Dr. Ananthi works in the areas of inter-ethnic and inter-religious relations, education policy related to questions of ethnic and national integration, multiculturalism, prejudice reduction, and most recently, religious extremism. Her work has appeared in international journals such as American Psychologist and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. She also writes opinion pieces for Malaysian newspapers, and she has a PhD from the Department of Experimental Psychology, the University of Oxford. Next, we will have Dr. Mukhriz, who obtained his LLB honors in 2007 from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and later the LLM from the National University of Malaysia in 2014. He completed his PhD degree at the Centre for Criminal Justice Studies, University of Leeds, the UK in 2019. His PhD research was about the use of criminal law and criminal justice system in countering terrorism in Malaysia. Dr. Mukhriz served at the Attorney General's Chambers as Deputy Public Prosecutor from 2018 to 2015. As an alter ego of the public prosecutor, he had conducted criminal trials and produced investigation papers, and he left the public legal service to join University Utara Malaysia in 2015. Dr. Mukhriz occasionally writes articles relating to criminal justice and terrorism in Malaysian newspapers for public awareness. And he is currently a senior lecturer at the School of Law, College of Law, Government and International Studies in UUM. And finally, we have with us all the way from Indonesia, Dr. Syafiq Hasyim, who is the visiting fellow at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. He is also a lecturer and director of the Library and Cultural Center at International Indonesian Islamic University, a newly established state international university in Indonesia. He obtained his MA in Islamic Studies from Leiden University and PhD in Islamic Studies and Interdisciplinary Studies from the Berlin Graduate School of Muslim Cultures and Societies, Freie Universität Berlin. His latest publications include Fatwa in Democracy, Majlis Ulama Indonesia, and The Rising Conservatism of Indonesian Islam, published in the Trans-Regional and National Studies of Southeast Asia 2019. So here we have our three speakers who will be speaking on this particular issue. But before that, let me give some background and context to the discussion tonight. First of all, let's look at some studies and data that are available. In 2018, Merdeka Center, which is Malaysian-based opinion research house, conducted a study across 4 Southeast Asia countries, namely Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. The findings of the study indicate that there is increasing degrees of extremism in these countries. In Philippines and Indonesia, there is a strong support for local militant groups, whereas in Thailand and Malaysia, there is support for foreign terror groups like ISIS. In fact, Malaysia scored the highest in terms of support for ISIS at 5.2%, as well as for the regional outfit Jemaah Islamiyah at 18.1%, which aims to establish an Islamic caliphate in Southeast Asia. Whereas for Indonesia, they recorded a 21% preference for local separatist groups. The study showed as well that 28% of Malaysian Muslim respondents demonstrated violence-receptive tendencies, meaning that they didn't directly reject violence. 2% of those respondents polled said they would directly participate in violent extremism. This is referring to the Malaysian respondents. While there are ongoing debates as to whether ISIS is still at large and a threat to the region, the recent return of the Front Pembela Islam leader, Rizik Syihab, to Indonesia is a cause for worry. In 2017, he placed himself in self-exile in Saudi Arabia, following charges on pornography and insulting state ideology, which have since been dropped. Rizik Syihab was a key figure in a mass movement against Jakarta's former Christian governor, Basuki Tjahjanurnama, better known as Ahok, who was jailed for insulting Islam. Additionally, over the years in Malaysia, there have been many incidents of intolerance within society, ranging from the recent protest on serving non-halal food items in Jayagrosa, allegations of serving non-halal ingredients in a restaurant chain, to having a Muslim-only laundry, to name a few. On top of that, there are also various developments of state sanctions ranging from bylaws that dictate forms of entertainment by women in certain states, segregation in cinemas, and the more recent DBKL announcement of a liquor ban provision to be implemented next year. And then under state religious laws, there are also raids that are carried out against communities of Shia Muslims. So these are just some examples to name a few. I would also like to touch on the developments over the COVID-19 period, where we witnessed the outpouring of support and generosity of Malaysians and those living in Malaysia who mobilized themselves to provide for multiple communities in terms of food and other staples, as the movement control order made access to these necessary items extremely limited, and for some, totally inaccessible. However, over the weeks, we also witnessed an incredible amount of hostility on social media towards Rohingyans when the enhanced movement control order was imposed at the Kuala Lumpur Selayang Market and surrounding areas. The undercurrent dissatisfaction against the Rohingyan communities who work at the market erupted to a campaign including several online petitions demanding that the Rohingya be deported from Malaysia and that their problems should be resolved by Myanmar. One such petition that garnered over 20,000 signatures was later removed because of reported hate speech. Also connecting back to the discussion on blasphemy laws that took place in the first and second forum, we must not forget that there are also cases where Malaysians have been charged and found guilty of blasphemy. In 2019, a Facebook user in Sarawak was jailed 10 years for insulting Islam and the Prophet under Section 298A and Section 505C of the Penal Code and Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act 1998. So this wasn't the only case, but more critically, we should note that various provisions are used for blasphemy and that and these are in our federal laws. So namely, it's the Penal Code that's used, as well as the Communications and Multimedia Act. So with such challenges in place, where we have a climate of increasing degrees of extremism, intolerance in our social practices, hate speech and laws used against blasphemy, amongst others, what does this mean for us in Malaysia and Indonesia, where our diversity is celebrated and well known globally, but in reality, there is increasing polarization between nationalities, ethnicities, and religious beliefs. So before we call upon the first speaker, I would like to remind our participants that after our speakers have presented, there will be time for questions and answers. So participants in Zoom, please put your questions or comments in the Q&A section. And for those following on Facebook, please put your questions in the comment section. And now, Dr. Ananthi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rozana. And thank you to Sisters in Islam and to Komuniti Muslim Universal for arranging this seminar. I'll do my comments bilingually in both Malay and in English. I think I'll just be clear that way. So in a diverse world that is growing increasingly small and increasingly diverse, how do we hold on to our values? How do we live our lives and raise our children the way we want to and in accordance with our deeply held values when the people and influences around us are sometimes very foreign and sometimes it seems that there is little hope? This is the insecurity that a lot of people feel and that is often capitalized upon by political and religious elite in order to entrench people in their faith and to raise walls between people of different faiths. Serangan teroris yang telah kita lihat di Eropah dan khususnya Perancis pada tahun ini benar-benar mengerikan. Biasanya, tindak balas terhadap serangan macam ini harus bersifat solidarity dengan orang-orang dan negara yang diserang dan yang sedang menderita. Dan itu memang respons official atau rasmi dari Putrajaya. Namun ada ahli politik di Malaysia yang menciptakan a kind of false equivalency, kesetaraan yang palsu antara penderitaan Muslim dan serangan ganas di Perancis dan membuat alasan bahawa serangan itu wajar. Ini menyumbang kepada naratif berkelanjutan, a sort of ongoing narrative berdasarkan ancaman dan rungutan bagi umat Islam dan menunjukkan bahawa keganasan adalah tindakan yang dapat diterima dan yang tepat untuk mempertahankan agama seseorang. Pada fikiran saya, ini merupakan satu naratif yang penuh bermasalah. And I'll explain why now. So Rozana told us about the Merdeka Center research that was done in 2018, and I was one of the authors of that study. Dan kami mengumpulkan data dari responden Muslim di Asia Tenggara, and hari ini saya menumpukan perhatian pada Malaysia dan Indonesia. Penekanan kami dalam kajian ini bukan pada faktor yang berkaitan dengan radikalisasi. It wasn't about radicalization. Sebaliknya, penekanan kami adalah pada faktor-faktor yang berkaitan dengan extremism, seperti yang wujud dalam populasi umum, right? So in the general population, what was the tendency to extremism? Dan kami berusaha memberikan gambaran tentang identity, pemikiran dan pengalaman orang Muslim yang kita boleh kata average, the average Muslim, where were they at in terms of their identity and their experience of the world. So we used a measure that was quite novel and unusual in the study, and that was a measure that Rozana referred to of violence receptivity in the general population. Right, yaitu setakat manakah orang ramai Muslim boleh setuju dan membenarkan keganasan digunakan untuk mempertahankan Islam. Kami mendapati bahawa hampir lebih kurang 20% responden Muslim di Malaysia dan Indonesia mengatakan bahawa mereka dapat menerima kekerasan atau penglibatan diri sendiri dalam keganasan atas nama mempertahankan Islam. So 1/5 of the respondents, at least 1/5 of the respondents in these countries expressed that they were open to violence or at least not averse to it under certain circumstances. Kadang-kala ekstremisme wujud dalam vacuum, tetapi kerap kali ekstremisme ganas tidak boleh wujud tanpa sokongan orang biasa yang bersedia dan mampu menyokong pengganas atau menyokong ideologi dan visi mereka, baik secara diam-diam ataupun secara aktif, right? So there has to be a resonance within the wider community, usually, for extreme activity and extreme points of view to flourish. Dalam kajian kami, 31% responden Muslim di Malaysia dan 25% responden Muslim di Indonesia menunjukkan kecenderungan atau tendensi ekstremis yang non-violent, yang termasuk menyerahkan keseluruhan harta benda mereka untuk mempertahankan agama. Jadi kenyataan dari pemimpin yang menekankan rasa rungutan atau rasa grievance di kalangan masyarakat boleh jadi trigger point atau spark untuk kelakuan ekstremisme. All it takes is for one alienated, disenfranchised person to be affected by such narratives. We know how that can turn out, and we saw how it has turned out recently. Sebab kedua, pemimpin kita harus berjaga dalam respons mereka terhadap insiden seperti ini adalah kerana insiden ini macam ini merupakan peluang untuk pemimpin-pemimpin kita menunjukkan kepimpinan yang matang dan bertanggungjawab dan memimpin melalui teladan. These are really key opportunities in a divided and frightened world to model good behavior and to put out narratives that are rooted in compassion and courage and which acknowledge how connected all of us are to one another. A really big problem in the world right now is that we don't always treat other people as human beings, especially when we don't agree with them or they come from, far-flung places or have a different view of the world, a different faith. Instead, we tend to treat them as political abstractions, as these monolithic entities that we can label and then we can denounce. And it's easy if you treat people as political abstractions, as members of this group or followers of this faith, to say, hey, your group was really awful to my group, so you deserve what happened. And speech like this encourages demonization rather than empathy and care for one another. And it's really exactly the kind of rhetoric that we do not need in a tinderbox environment. It is not even pragmatic rhetoric in that it doesn't lay the ground for the resolution or de-escalation of tensions and conflict. And I think that's an apt description of the world that we live in right now, unfortunately. It is a tinderbox. Sensitivities are very high. People are not deeply and meaningfully connected to one another. Economic insecurity and inequality is rife. People are very vulnerable, and many people face few promising or uplifting prospects in life. And into that mix, when you add a sense of grievance arising from the way that Muslims are treated in the world collectively, and a sense that people are out to get you as a Muslim, our research shows that you ignite a flame. In fact, we found that 63% of Muslim respondents in Malaysia reported high feelings of being aggrieved or being under siege by external forces. And more worryingly, we found that such grievances are associated with extremist tendencies. And this is, I think, a particularly noteworthy finding in a place like Malaysia, where Muslims are in the majority. You know, the sense of grievance, I think, is particularly noteworthy in this context. So this is something that we have to be conscious of in our public and even our private dialogue. Di Malaysia, kita menghargai kedamaian kita. Tetapi itu tidak bermaksud bahawa prospek ekstremisme ganas adalah sesuatu yang dapat kita abaikan. So, apakah faktor-faktor yang mungkin berkaitan dengan konflik ganas dan ekstremisme? Ketika kita membincangkan ekstremisme secara global, kita sering memberi perhatian kepada ideologi Islam dan masyarakat Islam. Tetapi kadang-kala kita melupakan arus intoleransi dan ekstremisme lain yang ada di kalangan kita. Data dari kajian kami menunjukkan sebilangan besar orang bukan Islam, terutama Kristian di Indonesia, melaporkan kecenderungan atau tendensi ekstremis tanpa keganasan, so non-violent extremist tendency. Kira-kira 50% responden bukan Islam di Indonesia melaporkan kecenderungan tersebut. Ini sangat berbeza dengan kecenderungan seperti yang dilaporkan oleh orang bukan Islam di mana-mana negara lain dalam kajian kami. Bukti dari kehidupan politik sehari-hari di Indonesia selama beberapa tahun yang lalu menunjukkan bahawa agama telah menjadi titik politik yang kuat yang mungkin telah menonjolkan perbezaan kelompok dan menjadikan identiti agama lebih menonjol dan relevan bagi orang bukan Islam, terutamanya orang Kristian di Indonesia. Begitu juga, ada kemungkinan bahawa kumpulan agama lain di Malaysia boleh menekankan identiti agama. Kita telah melihat contohnya dalam bentuk hindraf dan perhimpunan besar yang diadakan pada tahun 2007. Pada masa di mana pemerintahan konservatif Hindu di India semakin kuat, you know, the right-wing conservative Hindu movement in India has really gained momentum. Dan terdapat rasa kebanggaan di kalangan orang India di seluruh dunia. Diaspora India, terutama di tempat-tempat di mana mereka terasa seolah-olah mereka dipinggirkan, mungkin tidak kebal, right? Tidak imun terhadap kecenderungan yang tidak bertoleransi. Ini juga dapat dikatakan untuk orang Kristian di Malaysia yang tentunya telah diprovokasi selama bertahun-tahun. Saya tidak berhujah bahawa terdapat ancaman segera dari mana-mana kumpulan ini. That's not the point that I'm making. Sebaliknya, saya menyatakan bahawa kepelbagaian budaya atau multiculturalism adalah perkara yang agak delicate. And unless we learn to treat each other with respect and compassion and goodwill, it is not unthinkable that we could find rising intolerance and possibly even violent extremism in our midst. We need to remember that it doesn't take a huge coordinated event to lead to violent terror. Recent and historic events have shown us the devastation that individual actors can unleash. As Malaysians, I think we need to be paying close attention to these intolerant and extreme and religiously based currents and narratives in our midst. No one ever thinks of themselves as intolerant or extremist. It's always about somebody else. But I think we need to be particularly mindful of the quality of our speech at this time. Like I said, the whole world seems to be a tinderbox, and all it takes could be just one spark. And this is not to say, and I want to be clear about this point, this is not to say that we should not be critical about one another, about the practices or trends that we see around us that are troubling and problematic. There are many, and I think we should voice these and be critical. But we need to find a way to root our words and our actions in love and in compassion. Something that, you know, the folks at Charlie Hebdo simply don't understand and just don't believe in. Criticism that we make of our own groups or of others needs to serve to uplift and to empower and to lead to positive, constructive change, and not to tear down and to destroy. But that is another hallmark of the age, the times that we live in. It's an age of rage, an age of protest. It is an age of grievance. It's an age of righteousness. And none of these qualities facilitates good relations between diverse peoples, nor do they give people the dignity that they so keenly and sometimes desperately seek. A lack of dignity or of significance has been shown in our research and in other research to be a key factor predicting extremist tendencies. So we really do have to take care of each other. You know, we have a responsibility for each other, how we speak to each other, how we express our dissent. You know, we have that responsibility because as human beings, our drive for dignity and significance is one of our most fundamental. It cannot be denied. And if it is denied, then people tend to resort to quite extreme things to regain it. I also want to point out that there are actors and political parties in our midst, who all of you will know about, who define themselves in an oppositional manner and who do not seek to build bridges. I'm talking about groups like PAS, whose current politics and ambitions seem to be in opposition to the pluralism of Malaysia. Their version of Islam and their rhetoric causes people to retreat to their racial and religious shells and build walls instead of bridges. How do we deal with actors like these who seemingly act in bad faith, who don't seem to share our values? I think it's easy and natural for progressive and fair-minded people to find no common ground with groups such as these. But the reality is that if we do not engage, even with those whose politics we find troubling and distasteful, then we ourselves are not sufficiently committed to the pluralism and diversity that we so passionately defend. And practically speaking, we simply won't make progress. Kita harus benar-benar berusaha untuk memahami perspektif lain, walaupun perspektif itu susah untuk kita memahami ataupun terima. Kita harus melangkah keluar dari zon selesa kita untuk memperluaskan persefahaman dan rasa hormat dan benar-benar cuba mewujudkan masyarakat yang kita menginginkan. Sebaik saja kita berhubungan dengan orang-orang di seberang sesuatu isu on the other side of the aisle, ia menjadi lebih sukar bagi ekstremisme untuk berakar ataupun berkembang. In Malaysia, we're all very used to staying in our lane. You know, we're very well practiced at just putting our head down, minding our own business and not commenting on each other. But we can't do that anymore. We have to learn to build alliances and working relationships, even with peoples whose views we find very hard to receive. So selain ekstremisme yang ganas, kita telah melihat banyak insiden intoleransi di Malaysia, and Rozana gave us some excellent examples of that. So apakah pengaruh dan impact dari sikap dan peristiwa yang tidak toleran? So contohnya, as she said, kejadian seperti protes untuk mengeluarkan produk tidak halal dari pasar raya, di mana kedua-dua orang Melayu dan bukan Melayu berbelanja, atau institusi awam seperti perpustakaan yang menentukan pakaian yang harus dipakai oleh pelanggannya termasuk kanak-kanak, atau larangan di BKL yang dicadangkan untuk berjualan arak. Ini semua kejadian yang tidak sesuai dengan pluralisme. Ini adalah kejadian-kejadian yang tidak bertoleransi, yang bertujuan untuk meratakan dan kalau boleh menghapus perbezaan yang sah di antara kumpulan. Ekstremisme semestinya tidak bertoleransi, right? Extremism is necessarily intolerant. Tetapi tidak semua insiden intoleransi adalah insiden ekstremisme atau membawa kepada ekstremisme. So I think, you know, sometimes in our dialogue on this topic, because it's very fraught and complex, sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. But extremism and intolerance are two different things, but they are related. And I think that, you know, intolerance is, an increasing intolerance is a slippery slope towards extremism, widely spread. Semakin tidak bertoleransi dalam masyarakat, semakin sukar untuk kita kembali ke keadaan yang inklusif dan moderate. Tetapi selain daripada contoh-contoh macam ini, kami juga menemui contoh intoleransi yang ternyata dalam kajian kami. Kami mendapati bahawa majoriti responden Muslim di Malaysia dan Indonesia tidak mahu mengembangkan pemahaman mereka mengenai agama lain atau berkongsi kepercayaan mereka dengan orang lain. 59% responden di Malaysia dan Indonesia menentang pengajaran pendidikan pelbagai agama di sekolah, so multi-faith education. 59% of respondents in both these countries strongly opposed it. Terdapat sokongan yang jauh lebih tinggi untuk multi-faith education dari responden Muslim di Thailand dan Filipina, dua negara di mana umat Islam merupakan golongan minority. Dan juga sokongan yang jauh lebih tinggi untuk pendidikan macam ini dari responden bukan Islam di Malaysia dan Indonesia. Kami juga mendapati sikap tidak bertoleransi terhadap kumpulan Islam bukan Sunni, seperti Syiah dan Ahmadiyah. 61% responden di Malaysia percaya bahawa bentuk Islam bukan Sunni harus diharamkan di Malaysia. Dan 42% responden Indonesia juga percaya demikian. These findings are unsurprising, given the state-sanctioned and tightly controlled Islam that is prevalent in Malaysia. Dr. Azmil Taib, who writes extensively about Islamic education in Malaysia and Indonesia, argues that the Malaysian Islamic curriculum emphasizes components of Islam that are vastly more conservative than in Indonesia and do not emphasize the multicultural character of Malaysia and the mutual respect that needs to exist between people from different racial and religious groups. So it seems that the very Islam that Malaysian schools are teaching our young people is one which does not endorse pluralism and instead clearly lays out the only admissible form in Malaysia, thereby allowing no pluralism or diversity even within Islam. And this is a far cry from the Indonesian Islamic curriculum, to my understanding, and from what I've read, which emphasizes plurality and non-compulsion. Apa yang kita lihat di Malaysia merupakan keinginan untuk kesucian agama yang tidak inclusive. So we are seeing religion that demands homogeneity and demands the performance of a particular version of Islam. A state-sanctioned religious interpretation which does not emphasize the rights and respect for people, for everyone, but rather seeks to create divisions and raise fears about others who could potentially contaminate and corrupt the religious purity that is so keenly sought. Data kami menunjukkan bahawa 76% responden Muslim di Malaysia ingin mencapai beberapa matlamat yang berdasarkan kesucian agama seperti kebangkitan semula Khalifah Islam dan pelaksanaan hukuman hudud di Malaysia. 76% of the respondents wanted such purist Islamic goals in Malaysia. Tetapi versi Islam semacam ini nampaknya tidak menimbulkan rasa aman dan yakin diri di kalangan pengikutnya. Sebaliknya, nampaknya ia memupuk kerapuhan, a kind of brittleness, dan menambah rasa kelemahan dan vulnerability di kalangan pengikut. Dalam kajian kami dapati bahawa responden yang memupuk faktor naratif yang mengutamakan tujuan Islam yang suci dan ada interpretation agama yang agak literal juga menunjukkan kecenderungan ekstremis. Jadi buat diri saya, ia agak sukar pada masa ini untuk melihat prospek Malaysia dari segi hubungan etnik dan agama yang aman dan yang memang berharmoni. Sekiranya kita menempuh jalan sekarang, kita mungkin atau tidak akan mengalami insiden pengganas. I'm not able to predict that. Tetapi kita memang akan bergerak semakin jauh dari mewujudkan negara yang bersatu dan berhormat antara satu sama lain. Religion is a potent force for good and for evil, and it's been used as a means of control over people and of obedience for millennia all over the world, across all religions. But if religion is going to be a force for good, we need to reclaim it. And we need to democratize religion and make it something that is rooted firmly and deeply within a spirit of love and compassion, and in recognition of our common shared humanity. Any actions or thoughts that arise from a place of mutual love and compassion cannot possibly result in extremism. It's just not a logical conclusion. It is only in such a scenario that we can come to fully see one another in all our complexity and glory and all our imperfections, and begin to build bridges and alliances, even unlikely ones. Extremism can then hopefully return to the fringes where it belongs, rather than being a defining characteristic of the population at large, as it is in Malaysia at present. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ananthi. That was really, really very rich. You have shared so much in terms of the research. And it's actually very telling in terms of the times that we are in, particularly when, you were talking about there is a rejection of, of pluralism. And this is also evident as well in relation to the fatwa that was issued against sisters in Islam, where we are regarded as deviants for subscribing to liberalism and religious pluralism. So I think the battle, you have definitely set the stage that, things, the way I'm reading it right now is that, things are not going to get better anytime soon. And the other point that I like to touch about is the high numbers of respondents who want for, to have the rise of Islam and to have, hudud laws to be implemented. But how this actually ejects, what do you call this, for those people of other faith living in Malaysia, they feel that, these are some of the things that, they feel the fragility of the situation because there's such a rejection of diversity and pluralism. And alternatively, I mean, like when we raise the issue of how much, such extremist ideas and laws would affect the fabric of society, the rhetoric that we often hear is that, as a non-Muslim, you don't have to worry about it. Such laws will only affect Muslims, so you can go on living your lives and your lives would not be affected by the laws that are only for Muslims. So I think that definitely is a false sense of security there, and I think that's something that we really need to delve into further. But thank you so much. You've given us a lot of food for thought to think about. And now I would like to invite our second speaker to speak on, we have Dr. Mukhriz Madrus. Is he online already? So I invite Dr. Mukhriz to speak. Silakan.
All right. Thank you very much, Rozana, for your kind introduction just now. And also thank you very much to Sisters in Islam, as well as Komuniti Muslim Universal, KMU, for organizing this great event, I would say. First of all, please bear with me. My line might be not that good from this end. So please let me know if it's being, is there any problem for that? All right, okay. I think Rozana mentioned just now, earlier we, from the second or perhaps the first series, we have also discussed on the role of civil society to engage with the diversity. I think that is one of the main, or the priority should be given to that initiative rather than to the law. So the fact that I am maybe at the third series, it speaks volume why the law should, because in usual, I mean, like, law come normally after something happened, all right? But of course, when we are talking about extremism, what we look or we expect from law is that we can make use of it in terms of prevention, all right? In terms of prevention in countering extremism. But of course, law, particularly the rule of law, requires certainty and clarity. With that, a huge challenge of having a specific or any legislation to counter extremism is how we define extremism itself. The legal definition, I'm referring to the legal definition. In what way? We have been debating about what is terrorism. All right, for so long, there is no universally accepted definition, legal definition of terrorism. But at least there are features that we agree that that is the element of terrorism, the political element, the violence, the crimes, or perhaps uh, the creation of fear or causing terror. That is the element of terrorism. But how about extremism? Then there are several attempts made, especially in the UK, the US, to define extremism itself. Dan saya tak pasti ada ataupun tidak di Malaysia ataupun di Indonesia satu usaha untuk kita perjelaskan, perincikan about what is extremism that we are talking about. Who set the limit? If extremism means melampaui batas, what is batas? What is the limit? If we look at the UK definition, one of the official one, it is not legal definition as well. The UK's definition of extremism is something like active and vocal oppositions against British values, fundamental values such as democracy, rule of law, and etc. So perhaps when we are talking about Malaysia, can we put that extremism apabila ia melampaui atau menyanggahi rukun negara? Can we agree on that? I don't know. Even the definition which was framed in the UK have been contested fiercely, especially when we are talking about British values. What is British values? All right. Perkara yang sama juga di Malaysia apabila kita ingin menggubal satu undang-undang yang begitu spesifik khusus kepada ekstremisme, perkara pokok yang perlu kita lihat terlebih dahulu tentang makna ataupun definisi ekstremisme itu sendiri, ekstremisme itu sendiri. Jika tidak, it open to abuse, one, and it might backfire to other people. Adakah kita bersedia untuk melihat sebahagian daripada masyarakat kita dianggap ekstremis hanya kerana ia berpandangan berbeza dengan the majority? Right? Jadi begitu penting untuk kita perjelaskan apabila kita berbicarakan tentang apa itu ekstremisme, apa itu melampau, apa batasnya. Mungkin, saya hanya katakan mungkin ada yang menyatakan, oh cukup sekiranya kita apa saja, what goes against federal constitution, then it is extremism. Maybe. Or anything against rukun negara, or anything against Pancasila di Indonesia boleh dianggap ekstremis. Itu sangat bahaya bagi saya. Jadi dari situ kita perlu berhati-hati. Okay, sekiranya sebab sebelum ini ada beberapa suara yang mahukan suatu undang-undang yang lebih spesifik berkaitan dengan menangani ekstremisme ini. Namun kita mesti lihat, kita mesti fikirkan betul-betul tentang definisi ekstremisme ini. If not, akan ada pihak-pihak yang tidak sepatutnya menjadi the main target of the legislation akan menjadi mangsa. Sebagaimana kita juga pernah bincangkan kaitan dengan terorisme dan sebagainya. even if we look at the definition of terrorism in Malaysia, is so wide. Even it not just about causing terror or whatsoever, but if you look at the definition of terrorism in the penal code, it's so wide. It covers almost everything. Be it whether the crime have been committed, whether it's inchoate offense or not, it's all in the definition, which is somehow very dangerous and might undermine the fundamental rights as well. All right, so be careful with that. But of course, if we are talking about violence extremism, now we are talking about non-violent extremism and violent extremism. If we want to look from this perspective, violent extremism, ekstremisme yang melibatkan unsur keganasan, secara tak langsung memang sudah ada undang-undang, especially when we are talking about terrorism law. There are, I would say, over-criminalized offenses there within our penal code. A lot of offenses that can deal with violence extremism. But when we are talking about non-violent extremism, be it political extremism or ideological extremism, then here isu ini sangat rapuh. Kerana ia juga berkait rapat dengan freedom of religion, political right as well, freedom of expression as well. Terutamanya apabila kita bercakap tentang political extremism, is that contohnya kalau kita menggunakan definisi bahawa apa saja yang menentang demokrasi itu sebagai ekstremis. Now, let's say we are talking, sebagai contoh kita ada satu perkumpulan agama yang ternyata go against democracy, tapi dia tidak involved in any violence, but rather just calling for khalifah and so on. So I would rather say this is an extremist group, at least. But how we are, I mean, like based on the law yang ada, macam mana kita mahu tanggani ini, pada masa yang sama kita juga tidak mahu membungkam atau menindas hak-hak politiknya, hak-hak dia to express his political view, to hold opinion. Dan saya percaya ada juga di kalangan yang masuk dalam politik juga, yang masuk dalam demokrasi juga, yang still believe that khalifah is the answer, right? So how we have to deal with this, and for this reason as well, I think the law should able to distinguish, all right, the level and degree, or perhaps the severity of the bad speech itself. All right, so maybe we have to criminalize hate speech, but not the whole anything that we consider as bad. Perhaps the hateful one, but not the annoying one, right? Or perhaps not the sensitive one. If not, we will over-criminalize the right. Kita over-criminalize benda yang sepatutnya diangkat atau dijamin oleh perlembagaan. Alright. So now, extremism. The next issue is the manifestation of the extremism itself. The manifestation, it could be first incitement of extremism, or terrorism, perhaps glorifying terrorism. I think there are laws with related to that. But of course, this law might be also sedikit bertentangan dengan perlembagaan juga. Namun kita bukan untuk forum ini kita bincangkan. Namun apa yang kita nak lihat sekarang ada berkaitan dengan apabila pandangan-pandangan yang bersifat ekstrim itu dikongsikan, dipersembahkan kepada awam. Dan ini kalau kita lihat ada beberapa saranan yang saya percaya, contohnya saranan yang dibuat oleh Human Rights Commission United Nations dalam, for example, dalam Rabat Plan of Action. Di situ cukup menyatakan bagaimana kita tiga cadangan yang diberikan bentuk-bentuk sanction, the form of sanction that state should take, implement, criminalize, which should be the last resort, criminalize, okay. Jadikan kesalahan-kesalahan hate speech ini sebagai satu kesalahan jenayah. Okay, we will look at later in our law whether sufficient or not. And second, hate speech subject to civil suit. That is another way of doing it. And the third one is not under criminal, not under civil action, but rather it just something like more like administrative action. Perhaps the school, mungkin di peringkat sekolah, di kementerian letakkan larangan-larangan penggunaan perkataan-perkataan tertentu di sekolah, for example, right, which may be sensitive, may be if allowed may cause hatred or etc. And that is about the sanction that the state can make, yang boleh dibuat oleh negara melalui menjenayahkan kesalahan hate speech, ataupun menjadikan, contohnya kita boleh melalui civil suit, tindakan civil, saman dan sebagainya, dan juga melalui tindakan-tindakan pentadbiran. That is the sanction, I think, when we are talking about hate speech or how to deal with the manifestation of extremism itself. And I think the two, I mean, like the 2 points that I would like to raise here with regards to handle or to overcome hate speech is, first, as I said earlier, law should distinguish the degree and severity of the speech contextually and individually, and it's also related with culture, political, and history. That is a bit complicated and challenging work as well. Of course, all that we last time, I still remember when someone proposed that we should adopt religious and racial hatred act from the UK, which might be good, but we cannot just like copy from somewhere and put it here. And also bear in mind as well that in that particular legislation, it is clearly mentioned about the protection of freedom of expression, whereby that particular law does not prohibit anyone to insult or ridicule any religion. No. So maksudnya undang-undang itu sendiri tidak melarang mana-mana pihak untuk insult or ridicule any religion. That is based on the UK. Whether we are willing to accept that, that goes back to our political culture. But I think that's connect to my second point in enacting or reforming law with regard to hate speech is the hate speech law should aim to protect individuals or communities that belong to certain ethnicity, race, or holding specific religion or belief system, but it should not mean to protect the religion itself. If you get my point, it does not mean to protect the belief system or the religion from any criticism. All right. So the hate speech law is only to protect the individual, the communities, but not to protect the religion, the institution, not to protect the belief system from any criticism. That should be, if you want to legislate hate speech law, then you should consider this. Because if not, how can you, I mean, like, if not, it won't be balanced. In any religion, in any religion or any belief system, of course, you are not going to say that, it, sorry, akan ada keadaan, there is situation where you are going to criticize another religion. That is the true about having religion. Of course, you can say that everyone equal, everyone, but of course, for your own belief, of course, you have your own set of mind, right? But that's why, if you want to have a law, make it the law that allow or facilitate dialogues, allow and also facilitate debates. Okay. For that reason as well, we need law that emphasize, that put clearly or place clearly the blameworthy mental element. Mesti letak di situ dengan jelas, there is the bad intention. If someone say bad thing about one religion, you need to look back to the intention or the blameworthy intention of that particular guy or particular person. All right. So if that is why akta hasutan is problematic, sebab dia tidak ada elemen yang dengan jelas tentang niat menghasut itu. Ya. Tapi kalau kita lihat kepada Section 298 Kanun Keseksaan, Section 298 of the Penal Code, not 298A, 298 only, Section 298. It's quite wide, but it is clear that the intention is to cause hatred. We have Section 298A, which is problematic. It has been held unconstitutionally, in fact, but we don't know why the government still want to keep it. Even the latest one in 2014, the court still, the Court of Appeal still held that, affirmed the decision made before in the case of Muhammad Daud. But with reason known only to the government why they want to keep Section 298A. All right.
Dr. Mukhriz, do you want to wrap up your points?
All right. Okay, sure. So with regards to from legal perspective, yang pertamanya, persoalan berkaitan dengan criminalization ataupun prosecution, ini sepatutnya menjadi sebagai yang terakhir, the last resort. Bukan apa, sebab kita ingin menjaga pada masa yang sama hak the freedom of expression of others. Namun pada masa yang sama juga, undang-undang yang sedia ada perlu ditambah baik. There should be a reform, especially with regard to Section 298A, and as I said earlier, the law must address the different degree or severity of the speech itself, from the incitement, menghasut tu, or glorifying terrorism tu, until the annoying or just sensitive, which of course you should treat differently. You cannot just say that this is all sedition. No, You cannot do that because it will undermine the right, the freedom of expression of the citizens. And I think that is, with regards to the prevention, I think the law need to be reformed. If that makes sense to, I think that I'll end it here. Right. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Mukhriz. You've definitely gone into a lot of the legalities and the challenges that we face as normal citizens trying to navigate our way to be able to say and express what we want to express. But there are all these laws that are actually, like you said, there is over-criminalization. And I think in relation to prevention, that is something that's interesting to talk about, but maybe we can take it up in the Q&A. So thank you so much. That's been very, very informative. And now I would like to invite our third and final speaker to present, Dr. Syafiq Hasyim. Silakan Pak Syafiq.
Terima kasih Rozana, teman-teman sekalian. I'm very happy to be invited here as panelist for our webinar or discussion tonight. Jadi begini, saya akan berbicara dari konteks national discourse di Indonesia tentang 3 hal penting. 3 notion ya. Yang pertama adalah soal apa yang sering disebut dengan konservatifisme. Yang kedua adalah soal radikalisme. Dan tahap yang ketiga adalah soal ekstremisme. Di Indonesia pada umumnya, kalau melihat example, contoh-contoh that Rozana introduced to me, for instance about the Ahok case or Rizik Syihab case, we usually define that case as the phenomena of conservatism, not the phenomena of extremism. Yeah, because we have very specific and typical definition on what we call as extremism and what we call as conservatism and what we call as radicalism. This very strict has been discussed among Indonesian academic and also amongst policy makers. Jadi apa yang pada umumnya terjadi di Indonesia, misalnya persoalan blasphemy dalam konteks Ahok, the former governor of Jakarta, in the gubernatorial election in 2017, we categorize that case as the case of rising conservatism. Karena apa? Karena kita mendefinisikan ekstremisme itu harus ada sesuatu yang sifatnya mengarah, leading to violence. Ya. Sementara dalam banyak kasus di Indonesia, mungkin 90% kasus-kasus yang terjadi itu lebih tepat disebut sebagai konservatifisme. Kasus-kasus yang mengarah kepada violence lead sangat sedikit dan biasanya orang menyebut dalam konteks dan diskursus di Indonesia peristiwa-peristiwa seperti yang terjadi dengan ISIS di Indonesia, Islamic State di Indonesia atau Jamaah Islamiyah di Indonesia, mereka biasanya menyebut sebagai contoh dan peristiwa ekstremisme. Nah, ekstremisme dalam pengertian seperti ini sangat sedikit di Indonesia. Ya, yang jumlahnya terbanyak adalah kita sebut sebagai konservatif. Ini mungkin hampir 90% orang Indonesia itu bisa dikatakan konservatif. Dalam pengertian konservatif ini juga ada semacam degree, ya, degree di dalam konservatifisme itu. Ada yang degree-nya itu sifatnya intolerance, ada yang degree-nya radikal, ada yang degree-nya menuju kepada extremism. Lalu apa yang disebut dengan fenomena umum yang terjadi di Indonesia dengan istilah extremism, yaitu kita melihat bahwa Indonesia sekarang ini sedang berubah atau mengalami shifting system phase of Indonesian Islam from more liberal, tolerant, and open-minded discourse in understanding Islam toward more intolerant, extreme understanding of Islam, and the desire for Muslim to live under the Islamic law. Nah, ini yang disebut dengan apa oleh kalangan ahli dengan istilah konservatif turn di Indonesia. Banyak pengamat yang mengatakan bahwa in the last 10 years, Indonesia are entering the situation of conservative turn. Apa hal-hal yang menjadikan Indonesia masuk dalam situasi konservatif ini? Antara lain adalah semakin banyaknya orang Indonesia yang tidak berpikir liberal, tidak berpikir inklusif, dan tidak berpikir plural, sebagaimana terjadi pada masa akhir Orde Baru, the end of Soeharto period, dan masa awal era reformasi. Banyak kecenderungan yang sekarang terjadi, berdasarkan survei dan lain sebagainya, orang-orang Indonesia memiliki kecenderungan untuk berpikir tidak liberal. Misalnya sekarang ini setiap Desember, every December, we always trapped in the discussion whether Indonesian Muslim can say greeting to Christian people. Karena apa? Karena ada fatwa di dalam Majelis Ulama Indonesia bahwa mengucapkan hari Natal itu tidak diperbolehkan karena itu bisa menyebabkan perubahan pada sisi akidah atau faith. Pada masa Soeharto, fatwa ini sudah ada. The fatwa has been issued since 80s. But in the Soeharto era and until in the beginning of reform era, we never talks much about this kind of prohibition to giving greeting to the Christian people. Tapi sekarang ini orang banyak di Indonesia yang tidak membolehkan istrinya, suaminya, anak-anaknya untuk mengucapkan selamat Natal kepada orang-orang Kristen. Ini bulan Desember dan kita sudah mulai mendiskusikan masalah itu di sosial media dan lain sebagainya. Namun diskusi tentang ketidakbolehan mengucapkan hari Natal itu tidak sampai menyebabkan peristiwa-peristiwa yang menyebabkan terbunuhnya orang Kristen dan lain sebagainya. Karena itu kita lebih senang dalam konteks Indonesia menyebutkan peristiwa ini, hal seperti ini sebagai hal yang bersifat konservatif, tidak bersifat tidak bersifat ekstrim. Kalau kita berbicara tentang konservatifisme, memang Indonesia sekarang banyak hal yang menyebabkan mengapa konservatifisme, terutama Islamic conservatism, itu tumbuh di Indonesia. Banyak sebabnya. Many factors that become the driving force behind the rising conservatism of Islam. Antara lain yang sering terjadi pada kita pada saat ini itu adalah dua hal secara umum. Pertama adalah dipicu oleh international factor, persoalan internasional yang masuk ke kita, misalnya pengaruh Islamic State dan juga pengaruh kebijakan pemerintah negara-negara barat terhadap dunia Islam. Yang paling terakhir itu adalah misalnya persoalan di Prancis, yaitu persoalan laicite, persoalan yang berkaitan dengan religious freedom di Prancis. Itu juga memiliki dampak besar terhadap naiknya konservatifisme Islam di Indonesia. Dalam konteks ini pemerintah Indonesia juga dalam posisi yang sulit ya apabila menghadapi persoalan-persoalan seperti ini. Yang kedua, yang lebih banyak menimbulkan terjadinya kenaikan konservatif Islam itu adalah faktor-faktor di dalam negeri. Pertama adalah faktor kebangkitan identitas politik, identity politics ya. Sebetulnya identity politics itu sudah ada sejak lama, tapi mengalami puncaknya sejak tahun 2017 dalam konteks pilihan gubernur Jakarta, yaitu Ahok. Pada saat itu, Ahok dianggap melakukan blasphemy ke dalam Islam. Saya adalah salah satu Islamic expert ya yang diminta oleh polisi to give a witness for the side of Ahok. And at the time, I carefully studied about what actually the problem which is accused to Ahok. Saya mempelajari semua dokumen yang berkaitan dengan Ahok speech. Dan menurut saya, pidato Ahok pada saat itu tidak ada kaitannya atau tidak memiliki kaitan langsung dengan upaya Ahok untuk melakukan blasphemy terhadap Islam. I was interrogated by the National Police for 9 hours just to give my witness to explain to the police that the speech of Ahok didn't have any correlation with the blasphemy. Nah, tapi karena tekanan masyarakat yang begitu besar pada saat itu, terutama yang berasal dari kalangan konservatif, hampir semua kelompok agama, Majelis Ulama Indonesia, Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, itu memiliki komentar tentang Ahok. Dan yang paling keras komentarnya adalah dari Majelis Ulama Indonesia, in which the Council of Indonesian Ulama issue special fatwa for Ahok. According to the fatwa, Ahok has committed to blasphemy to Islam. Ini fatwa itu lalu kemudian dijadikan sebagai reference dalam pengadilan Ahok. Di dalam pengadilan Ahok, keputusan pengadilan mengatakan bahwa Ahok bersalah. Ahok telah menghina Islam. Ya, of course, pengadilan have two sources in this kind of issue. The first one is what we call national law. Indonesia still have the law on blasphemy, state law number 1, 1965. Siapa saja yang melakukan tindakan penghinaan terhadap agama, maka orang itu bisa dikenakan hukuman. Yang kedua adalah sumber yang merujuk kepada general understanding of the Muslim community, especially represented by Council of Indonesian Ulama, who state in its fatwa that Ahok can be already commit to blasphemy. Dua hal ini yang menyebabkan kemudian Ahok dipenjara. Tapi peristiwa ini yang paling penting adalah dijadikan sebagai tonggak bagi gerakan konservatif Islam untuk memiliki peranan yang lebih, to have more rule in the public sphere. Jadi mereka menjadi kelompok penekan setiap peristiwa yang berkaitan dengan agama that they can materialize into the legal case, for instance defamation or blasphemy or other issues, and then they use this case. They file the report to the police. Nah, ini peristiwa 2017 dalam konteks pilihan gubernur di Indonesia menjadi semacam figur yang penting bagi kelompok konservatif ini untuk memainkan peran di dalam konteks public sphere sebagai kelompok penekan. Nah, hal-hal seperti ini lalu menjadi semacam example, menjadi semacam contoh bagi gerakan-gerakan ekstremisme. Kemudian, hal yang lain yang menyebabkan kita bisa dikatakan sebagai negara yang berada dalam situasi konservatif term, itu karena banyak terjadi apa yang disebut dengan the legislation of Islamic law into the state law. Jadi kita dulu berharap bahwa Jokowi menjadi presiden. Many people expect and hope that Jokowi can end Islamic conservatism or the use of Islam in the legal and public sphere of Indonesia, tapi pada kenyataannya hal ini sulit dilakukan oleh Jokowi. Bahkan kita bisa mengatakan bahwa dalam masa Jokowi ini justru terjadi apa yang disebut deepening Syariatisation, yaitu Syariatisasi yang semakin terlembaga di dalam konteks perundang-undangan, hukum, dan politik di Indonesia. Saya akan memberi contoh kecil. Yang pertama adalah sekarang Indonesia semakin established untuk menjadi negara yang mempromosikan apa yang oleh orang Malaysia sebut sebagai syariah ekonomi. Di mana-mana di Indonesia program ini disebarluaskan dan didukung oleh pemerintah. Bahkan in the last 5 years, the government of Jokowi promote a lot about the importance of having syariah economy as an alternative economic system in Indonesia. Yang kedua adalah kita juga melembagakan halal projects, halal certification. Pada masa Jokowi ini kita membentuk satu lembaga negara khusus yang menangani persoalan halal ini. Banyak orang mengkritik bahwa apa yang dilakukan oleh Jokowi ini pada dasarnya adalah apa yang sering disebut dengan the structural Islamization. Jika dulu halal certificate itu dilakukan oleh Islamic Civil Society, especially done by Majelis Ulama Indonesia, but now since 2019, the government of Indonesia already have specific body to regulate about halal certification. Ini artinya apa? Ini artinya Indonesia atau Jokowi membawa hukum-hukum formal, ya, hukum-hukum formal Islam ke dalam negara.
Pak Syafiq, minta dirumuskan, tinggal seminit saja lagi.
Oke, kemudian peristiwa-peristiwa yang lain yang berkaitan dengan gaya hidup, ya, ini yang banyak sekali sekarang dialami oleh masyarakat umum di Indonesia, di mana sekarang sedang mengalami kenaikan apa yang disebut dengan gaya hidup yang berdasarkan kepada syariah norm, ya. Misalnya orang sudah tidak mau lagi menyimpan uangnya di bank konvensional, mereka tidak mau pergi ke restoran yang tidak ada sertifikat halal, mereka tidak mau lagi merayakan tahun baru, mereka tidak mau lagi mengucapkan hari Natal, dan banyak kasus-kasus yang lain. Justru konservatifisme banyak disumbang oleh perubahan gaya hidup, dari perubahan gaya hidup yang terbuka terhadap segala nilai menjadi gaya hidup yang didasarkan kepada nilai-nilai syariah. Ini yang ingin saya kemukakan, bahwa apa yang sedang terjadi di negara kita, di Indonesia ini, menurut saya lebih tepat disebut sebagai gejala naiknya konservatifisme daripada disebut sebagai gejala ekstremisme. Demikian Bu Rozana, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Syafiq. Thank you so much. I have to be honest, it's a little bit depressing to hear what you had just presented, only because there seems to be much more similarities in terms of where Indonesia is moving towards, that's becoming to seem like, you know, the experience that we have here with Islam in Malaysia. Patah hati sedikit ya, Pak Syafiq?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I am so happy that there are so many questions from our participants. We basically have about 34 minutes. So I'm actually going to pick up some of the questions that have come forth from our participants for our panelists. And if I could perhaps maybe start with Dr. Ananthi. This is a question that's specifically for you. So thank you for the very enlightening research findings. Given the current political economy landscape of rising intolerances and increasing extremism, what can we do beyond building alliances and attempting to speak out? What practical actions can be taken to address or combat the current realities which facilitate and allows extremism to proliferate in Malaysia? For example, 1, religion is a key political tool. 2, the intrinsic relationship between state and religion. And 3, the overarching legal framework that is often used as tools to silence alternative opinions. And this question comes from Bachla Naidu. Do you want to take this first, Dr. Ananthi?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that, as you rightly point out, there are many forces that are paralyzing right, for people who want change, but which have the ability to worsen certain tendencies and inclinations that we're already seeing in society. So for the rest of us who want to live in a very different kind of Malaysia, it seems to me that at this moment in time, the response and the efforts have to be much more bottom up. You know, they have to percolate up. They have to be within communities, responding to particular problems. And I'm really heartened by the work, obviously the monumental work of groups like Sisters in Islam, and more recently, you know, efforts by KMU to really bring people together to talk about difficult things. You know, that in itself is a fairly new thing in our culture. We don't do this, right? And that takes practice. So organizations like this, I think, are of tremendous utility and tremendous benefit. And there are many other projects. There's one called Imagined Malaysia, which is really about tackling historical narratives and really understanding different narratives and understanding where they're coming from, and not believing that there is only one version of history that we all need to abide by. There are the architects of diversity who are doing really interesting work in terms of bringing young people from different groups, different socioeconomic classes and religious and racial backgrounds together and having them spend time together. So I think that there are efforts that are heartening and can lead to the kind of change that we want, but I would like to see more. And I particularly want to see more in terms of organizations which are helping people find ways to talk to each other, right? Because that point I made about building alliances, I don't just mean at the political level. Obviously, that is key. But for the rest of us, how do we talk to our neighbors? You know, how do we talk to our neighbors who have very different points of view about how we live and how we practice our faith? You know, how can we still be friends? How can we be friends or maintain respect for the personhood of people whose views really don't align with ours and are often, you know, things that we're actually working hard against? So I think that, you know, in the United States, if you see, there are a lot of organizations that have proliferated, particularly in the Trump era, to address exactly this kind of thing. So, you know, places like the Theory of Enchantment or Braver Angels, who are tackling this issue of how do we bring people together. And the other thing I would say is that I would really like to see an agitation amongst parents and amongst society at large and various civil society groups for the teaching of some sort of multi-faith education in our schools. You know, I think this is absolutely key to being a citizen, a democratic citizen in a multicultural society, is having at least a basic understanding for different faiths and their tenets and a sort of empathy for one another. And so rather than a separation of church and state, which I think another comment also asked about, I would like to actually see a way to bring faith into the system in a way that is more inclusive and that is more respectful of difference, so that we can all rise up together.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ananthi. I will now go to the next question, and this is for you, Dr. Mukhriz, from Andrew Koo. So he asks that in 2016 and subsequently, the government declared liberalism, pluralism, and LGBTism as threats to national security in Malaysia, and human rightism has also been mentioned. In your view, given what you had spoken about just now, are these examples of extremism?
All right, thank you very much. It reminds me when the nations, when the states and also scholars were discussing about what is terrorism. One of the contentious and contested part is that whether a state can be a terrorist, whether a state can be terrorist, not just like, because people keep emphasize on the non-state actors of terrorism or individuals or groups. But how about state? Can the state be a terrorist? I think people start to say yes. If you look at the one of the definition adopted by the UN General Assembly is yes, a state can be a terrorist as well. And it goes the same with if we have perhaps a clear features of extremism. Can a state be an extremist? I would say yes. If it goes against its constitutional values, its societal values that it should uphold. All right. That is one point. The second point is that the problem in Malaysia that everything can be considered, can be labeled, can be declared as national security threat. Everything. That is the problem in Malaysia. Even last 2 weeks that we should not give citizenship to the child of a Malaysian woman if he or if she married to a foreign man because of national security threat as well, which is, I won't say rubbish, right? So it becomes like hantu, you know? Everything can be hantu. Tengok pokok pisang, hantu pokok pisang. Tengok ada ketuk pintu, hantu ketuk pintu, hantu purda, hantu susu. Everything can be hantu. It's just like national security threat. Semua benda dimomokkan, being demonized, and at the end of the day, we don't know what is actually the threat, what is the actual threat. Right, that is the problem in Malaysia. I hope it makes sense to you, Mr. Andrew. Can I proceed to the one?
Yes,
Muhammad
by
Amirul.
Muhammad. Yeah, please proceed. Go ahead.
All right, just a brief. I think he was. Yes, I do agree with you.
So maybe for the benefit of the audience, just let me read the question first.
All right, great.
Okay, sure. So Muhammad Amirul Ashraf asks, melihat secara umum konsep kebebasan bersuara di Malaysia dan juga konsep hasutan adalah berada dalam status yang walking on a tightrope, menyebabkan sukar untuk rakyat, sukar untuk bersuara, dan manakala yang bersuara pula sering dikenakan tindakan undang-undang. Jadi pada pandangan Dr. Mukhriz, bagaimanakah lawmakers kita sebenarnya walaupun tidak berniat untuk mereka tidak berniat untuk melonggarkan undang-undang sedia ada atau yang akan digubah kerana amalan politik sempit yang sering dimainkan, maka undang-undang boleh digunakan oleh mereka untuk mengawal dan menghalang mereka yang menyuarakan pandangan berbeza dengan lawmakers. Terima kasih.
Okay. Alright. Terima kasih Muhammad Amirul. Point saya yang pertama, sebab itu kita perlu berhati-hati tentang definisi ekstremisme itu sendiri. Kerana sekiranya definisi ini bersifat umum, dia bukan saja counterproductive, ya. Dia tidak mampu menangani masalah ekstremisme, tapi juga membuka jalan kepada salah guna kuasa, memberi kuasa yang lebih besar, kuasa budi bicara yang lebih besar kepada pihak berkuasa. Dan ini kalau besar with safeguard. Sekiranya kalau ada kuasa yang besar, perlu adanya lindung jamin, perlunya ada safeguard. But the question is whether we have sufficient safeguard or not. That is whether institutional safeguard or legal safeguard as well. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, kita perlu berhati-hati. Kadang-kadang kita ada kecenderungan apabila ada satu masalah, kita akan terus cadangkan undang-undang baru. Cadangkan undang-undang baru tanpa konsultasi ataupun rundingan dibuat dengan mereka secara meluas atau terangkum dengan masyarakat. This kind of reactive legislation ini pun biasanya tidak berkesan, tapi dia hanya sekadar untuk to show that we are doing something. Ini yang disebut tadi hanya sekadar untuk politik sempitnya. Akhirnya juga kesannya adalah sama, dia juga memberi ruang kepada salah guna kuasa lagi. Dan yang paling memudaratkan adalah sekiranya undang-undang ini menjadi berlampau ataupun berlebihan sehingga menghakis hak-hak yang dijamin oleh perlembagaan. Sebab itu bila saya bincang tadi berkaitan dengan hate speech law, kita perlu berhati-hati dengan ini. Yes, kita perlu lawan hate speech ini, betul. Tapi pada masa yang sama, kita juga perlu berhati-hati agar undang-undang sekiranya ingin dibuat oleh pihak berkuasa tidak mengorbankan hak-hak yang dijamin perlembagaan yang memang dalam keadaan boleh dikatakan nazak jugalah setakat ini. Right. Jadi yang ketiga, sekiranya undang ini sekiranya satu, adakah keadaan sekarang, undang-undang sekarang yang wujud di existing law ataupun undang-undang yang mungkin ingin diusulkan oleh kerajaan boleh bukan sahaja melawan hate speech, tapi pada masa yang sama menggalakkan free speech, menggalakkan good speech pada masa yang sama. Okay, sebagaimana kita let's say kalau kita kata kita nak lawan fake news, pada masa yang sama apa yang kita patut buat adalah freedom of information. That is how sepatutnya ia perlu berjalan secara seimbang. Okay, so apa-apa undang-undang sebagai kumpulan masyarakat madani mesti lihat kepada itu. Bukan setakat balance, tapi ia perlu berkadaran, ia perlu proportionately, dan dia juga perlu mengikut keperluan. Itu saja. Terima kasih Muhammad Amirul.
Terima kasih Dr. Mukhriz. Dr. Syafiq, I'm going to move on to you now. So there are two questions that we've compiled here for you. The first question is, are all the ulama in Indonesia on the same page in their views and teaching? And it will help if they are, otherwise it can be conflicting if not congruent. And the second question is, what is your opinion of President Jokowi's executive order to ban Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia for going against the Pancasila and the Constitution? Dipersilakan, Pak Syafiq.
Yeah, thank you for the hello. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think Indonesian ulama do not have similar understanding on Islam, on some issues on Islam. They are not one in voice. They are diverse. They are affiliated with different organizations. They are affiliated with different madhab, Islamic school of law, and theological school of theological school. Therefore, I think Indonesian ulama some kind have different stance, to respond. For instance, the case of Ahmadiyah. You know that Majelis Ulama Indonesia issue a fatwa that Ahmadiyah is already not part of Islam, but Ahmadiyah is heretic group from Islam. But then Nahdlatul Ulama have different fatwa to Ahmadiyah. Nahdlatul Ulama state that Ahmadiyah is different from Islam. The meaning of different from Islam is that not similar with the meaning that Ahmadiyah is deviant, is heretical from Islam. This is some example that among Indonesian ulama actually they don't have one similar understanding on some issue of Islam. Let's say for the case of Ahok, actually many of Nahdlatul Ulama scholars And ulama of Nahdlatul Ulama, the first largest of Islamic organization in Indonesia, see the Ahok didn't commit to blasphemy because we have Nahdlatul ulama different perception and interpretation from, let's say, Majelis Ulama Indonesia. Muhammadiyah also have different perception. So in terms of this kind of issue, I think Indonesian ulama are not under one umbrella. They are different from one organization to another. And then for the case of Jokowi regulation or policy to ban Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, some people say that this is the way of Indonesian government to reduce extremism, but some people, most of human rights defenders and activists state that Jokowi policy that ban Hizbut Tahrir is some kind of undemocratic policy. This is this perception is actually belong to most democracy activists and human rights defenders. But for Nahdlatul Ulama, and also especially for Nahdlatul Ulama and also for the Council of Indonesian Ulama, the Jokowi policy is actually already on the tracks, and Jokowi should issue a policy that bans Hizbut Tahrir, because Hizbut Tahrir is dangerous for the integration and the unity of Indonesia, and also Hizbut Tahrir propose an alternative political system to Pancasila. If someone to propose something different from the foundation of the state, we should ban them from their activities from the public, political, and legal sphere. This is, for instance, the opinion of Nahdlatul Ulama in understanding the policy of Jokowi to ban Hizbut Tahrir. So we are always have different kind of opinions, but the general tendency usually we are tending to become more conservative, meaning moderate conservative. Thank you. Rozana, unmute.
Minta maaf ya, sudah lewat. Unmute dan mute-nya sudah tidak bisa lagi. Okay, so I was saying that our two speakers have had 2 questions each. So I'm actually going to now end the session with a question for Dr. Ananthi, because you've just had 1 question. So this is for you. So the question is, are you aware of the work of the Pew Research Center in the US? Do you think the results of your research are consistent with the Pew Research Center's finding that while the government regulations on freedom of religion and belief have increased in Malaysia, social hostility has actually increased and not reduced? And is this intolerance leading towards extremism?
Yes, I would agree that there has been an increase in social hostility, and it has been gradual and it is pervasive. And, you know, the kind of things that Dr. Syafiq was talking about, you know, do we wish you know, our Christian friends, Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas. You know, these are the kinds of issues that we have been talking about for many years now. And in general, the consensus seems to have fallen on the side that we don't, that, you know, it does get in the way of faith if you even acknowledge another faith and their practices and their customs. And it's similar with the use of the word Allah by certain groups in East Malaysia, and how that has been appropriated and taken away from them, something that was traditionally done and which really caused no harm to anybody else. So there is great evidence of increasing hostility. And I think we can see that. I mean, the research, the data, I think is quite clear, but I think we see that in our daily lives when the things that we, growing up in Malaysia, used to take for granted, you know, going to a friend's house, eating a meal with someone from a different race, not worrying about what kind of cutlery was being used and whether this food was going to in some way contaminate me. You know, open houses, for instance, are far less common. You know, they were such a defining feature of our multiculturalism, but they're a lot less common now. People are very, very fearful. So, I mean, I don't want to end on a very negative note, because I think optimism is absolutely essential. And I think that's why we're all here, not as purveyors of doom, but to really see if there are things that can be done. But if we continue down the trajectory that we're going, I don't see how we are going to be able to create the kind of vibrant society that we want to live in, and to really harness the wonderful diversity and multiculturalism that Malaysia and certainly that Indonesia represent. And one of the things I would like to say in response to this, but also in response to some of the other questions that I was reading, is that religion, you know, there is really a sense that religion has been used as a tool in our various countries to exert political control and to demand obedience from the populace. And in such a setting, religion then is used to tightly set norms and to regulate behavior. And so that's why a discussion about, do you wish someone Happy Christmas, is a national discussion. It's not a private matter, right? In fact, the distinction between private and public is really not clear within certain religious spaces in Malaysia anymore. And, you know, if you think about the way that this is being done, these very tightly set norms and boundaries and the regulation of behavior, like, what does that remind you of? You know, who do we do this for? We do this for children, right? And so one of the questions I saw towards the end was, you know, why is there so much fear and lack of confidence for a majority group in a place like Malaysia? And I think it is because religion has been used, education at large has been used to infantilize, to create a kind of permanent state of prolonged state of childhood amongst the populace, so that they are actually very, very uncertain about how to deal with complexity and with messiness, which are simply a reality of living in as an adult in any context, but particularly in a diverse one. So I think that's where we are, but I think I'm hopeful that there are things that we will do for this to change.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ananthi. And so with this, I would like to close our session. And firstly, I would like to say thank you very, very much to all our panelists. You have been really fantastic and giving and generous in terms of your knowledge and experience. For the audience, you know, we hope that you have gained different insights and perspectives, and we hope that you will continue having these crucial conversations amongst your circles of family and friends. And so now I would actually like to, the organizers have got a poll for the participants in Zoom particularly. If you can respond to the poll. There's only 2 questions for you to respond to. And so with that, Sisters in Islam and Komuniti Muslim Universal had as our objectives of conducting these forums to offer spaces and platforms for healthy discussions on very difficult and painful issues. We deem this as necessary in order for us to foster better understanding amongst all of us, so that we can bring these diverse perspectives and views for you and the public to consider, particularly when how we respond to these contentious issues, what we say and do have consequences that affect multiple lives and communities, as well as our fundamental freedoms on right to free speech and expression. And so we thank you for sharing your time with us, and we wish you a calm and safe ending for 2020 and a hopeful year for 2021. Take care, everyone, and stay safe.